This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your source for the latest Iowa ag news headlines right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning team of Dustin Hoffman, Riley Smith, Mark Magnuson, and Andy Peterson. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Dustin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Huffman. Today is Thursday, December the 12th, 2024. So glad you could join us here today. Coming up a little later on in the program, we'll talk with Ross Baldwin of agmarket.net as we find out what happened in the grain and livestock markets today. But first, we're going to talk with Purina's Dr. Olivia Genther-Schroeder. She's going to talk to us about their Resilient Calf program and what that means for producers. Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, talking with the folks at Purina right now, talking with Olivia Genther-Schroeder. Dr. Olivia, thanks so much for taking time to visit with us today.
Thank you so much.
All right, so we're talking about cattle, obviously, and feeding them, and obviously everything starts with the resiliency of the calf. The resilient calf is what you guys are calling it. Tell us a bit about what you're sharing with those cattle producers and getting them going here.
Yeah, so when we talk about a resilient calf, that's essentially a calf that we have raised to the best of our ability. And that's an animal that long-term will be able to endure challenges, to be resilient to those challenges, as well as recover quickly and efficiently. And we do that in the very young animal because the first few days, weeks, months of life are critically important for actually developing those systems that that animal will rely on long-term. And unfortunately, our natural production systems, there are a lot of stressors associated with them, even if we do everything to the best of our ability. Calves are going to have to get on a truck sometimes. Cows are going to go through lactation and transition. And a resilient animal is an animal that has the gut and immune system that are able to handle those challenges.
And so kind of going from what you're saying right there, obviously this is something that can work both beef and dairy side of that animal, right?
It absolutely is. And so anything that we can do to keep that animal healthy, to make sure that they're gaining appropriately, will allow that animal to develop those systems the way that we want. And in animals that we hand raise, so if we think especially Holsteins and beef on dairy calves, we have the opportunity to control that nutrition and everything we're providing, as well as the environment from day one. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to do that as appropriately and to the best of our ability to really develop those systems that will matter long term.
So if we're talking about the dairy, let's focus there first. What kind of things are you looking at to get that calf developed so that way it's going to have the best opportunity possible through its life?
Yeah, so the key building blocks are going to start with nutrition, but then we're going to build on that building block of nutrition with gut health, gut integrity, building the microbiome, and building the immune system. And we can do that starting with nutrition. So making sure that we're providing the calf the amount of nutrition that they need to grow, which means that they have enough nutrition to develop those other systems. And then we can layer on top of that things like probiotics and phytogens that might help encourage that immune system to develop to the best of its ability.
All right. Now, is there any difference when you're talking about the bulls versus the cows coming up? Because obviously you're going to have stock for reproduction for the bulls. Is there any differences there, or is it just calf specific to kind of get them all that equal footing?
I think that's the really cool thing about understanding early life nutrition is that it's applicable across basically all of our mammals. So anything from your beef calf to your Holstein calf, even to swine, if you want to talk about that, making sure that we're building those systems so that long term they develop the way that we want. So for example, if we think about the microbiome and developing that across all of our species, we have such a great opportunity in that young animal to make long-term changes that we can't do in our older animals. If we want to feed a probiotic, we have to feed that every day. Whereas in a calf, we can actually set that microbiome for long-term success without having to consistently do those things like feed certain probiotics.
All right, so then going over to the beef side of things, obviously you're looking at two different worlds when you're talking about beef. You have the feedlots and you have the open plains and the grazing cattle. Are there different considerations for the life of this animal before we know where it's going to be, whether it's feedlot or an open range?
I think that's a good question and one that we don't necessarily know the answer to. But what I will say is that anything that we do that raises that calf appropriately, that we get that great average daily gain, as long as we're preventing issues that require antibiotics, those types of things, that animal is going to be set up for success no matter what environment they're going to be ultimately in.
So if producers are looking to get started on this kind of a program and learn more about it, Where's the first step for them to go logically to get this thing going so they can start to get, obviously, because return on investment and obviously getting the most for that calf is going to be paramount for them, whether they're selling for feedlots or whether they're raising it for their own stock?
Yeah, so I think our recommendation would be to start with the milk, with colostrum actually, because that's the first thing that we're going to get to our calves, making sure we get good quality and quantity of colostrum, and then the milk replacer is going to be really critical. Something that's well balanced, that's got the right nutrition and nutritional density, that's going to allow that animal to succeed.
All right, and if folks want to learn more about these programs and how Purina can help them and get the conversation started for their operation, where do they go?
You can reach out to your local Purina representative, or you can go to purinamills.com to find more information.
All right, well, we thank you so much, Doctor, for giving us this insight on the program.
Thank you.
That again was Purina's Dr. Olivia Genther-Schroeder. We're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soy Checkoff. When we come back, we'll look at the closing markets with agmarket.net. This is Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
It's time now for the Ag Matters PM Closing Market Summary, your source for market analysis and settlement prices from the day's trade in Chicago, courtesy of the folks at agmarket.net. We're back on Ag Matters PM, and we are talking right now with Ross Baldwin of agmarket.net, running down these closing numbers. And Ross, let's start in those grains. What did we see in the corn and soybeans today?
Lower day of trade across the grain markets. March corn ended the day 4.5 cents lower. Spreads were pretty flat, with May down 4.5 also. Over soybeans, they were basically unchanged, and surprisingly, soybeans, it was actually a pretty tight trading range. The Jan soybean contract had a 10-cent trading range, and we ended back unchanged. Down, they were actually up a quarter of a penny, 9.95 3/4, but closed just in the upper end of the range, you could say, not far off the highs of 9.98, but a very quiet day of trade over in the soybean market. And over in the wheat market, wheat was down 4.5 cents, 4 cents over in the Kansas City contract. It was Chicago that was 4.5 cents lower.
Of course, in soybeans, the way it's been going, I guess a day where you gain a little bit is better than the days we had been having overall the last couple of weeks.
Correct. The soybean market's just been, it's been very range bound, and I think it's somewhat surprising to people because weather in South America has been ideal, and the forecast remains very good. That soybean crop is on pace to be a very big crop, and we're going to have no shortage of soybeans in the globe if that crop can finish the way it looks like it can. I mean, it's still early. You got to remember, the weather down in South America, it's been ideal, and the soybean market stayed extremely range bound here. The January contract has found solid support for a few months now, down in this low 980 range. We did dip below 980 briefly within the last few weeks, but every time it seems Jan beans get down to 980, they find solid support. And so for the time being, beans remain extremely range bound. But the thing to keep your eye on is the weather down in South America has remained very ideal. And while it is still early down there with their harvest not starting until the end of February, first part of March, the weather could change, but it would have to really get to doing it in a hurry, just given how ideal that forecast has been, with good temps, really good precip. So something to keep an eye on as we do move forward on beans is that it's still plenty of downside that looms out here across the bean market as South America's crop continues to grow, and the forecast looks ideal. We could still be on track to have more beans in the globe than we probably have usage for.
All right, let's move over to the livestock side of things. How do we do in those cattle markets today?
It was a lower day of trade across the cattle markets here today, but it wasn't nothing too wild. The cattle markets really, it's been on a tear higher here this week, with the fat cattle contracts for the week still up over $5. Feeder cattle, they're been $2 to $3 higher on the week. They're not quite keeping up pace with live cattle, but on the day, Deese live cattle was only 12.5 cents lower. Feb was 52 cents lower. The feeder cattle contract, the nearbys were 70 to 80 lower, and the deferred contracts were a little over $1 lower. The big driver in the cattle markets has been the cash trade market. It's been $3 to $4 higher here this week, with the north starting out at 193, and there's been trade as high as 195. These are live picked up prices. I'd say a majority of the trades occurred around the 194 live picked up. So cash remains the big driver in the cattle market. The managed money crowd has wasted no time over the last few months as they've built into this big long position, but as they're seeing cash 3 to 4 higher again this week, they are really piling into the long side of this thing, and they're getting to some big positions. When you will get to see the COT report here tomorrow after the close, but it wouldn't surprise me if the managed money crowd isn't long over 130,000 live cattle contracts, and their feeder cattle position, it's probably in the 16 to 18,000 long position range. And it's really interesting, and it's been fascinating across the protein space because the hog market, it had a quiet day today. It was up 10 cents. The Feb contract was, but hogs have been, they've really been in a downtrend, and they have some signs here where there's room for a significant amount of downside if they would get to shove in this market. I think Feb hogs, you got to look at support around this 82 range, and if you would close Feb hogs below 82, there is plenty of downside potential in the hog market, and it's largely driven off the fact that the managed money crowd has been holding a record long hog position. And so it's back to my point of, it's been kind of fascinating across the protein space that they've went record long hogs. They've built into one of the larger live cattle positions that they've had in the last several years. It'd be pre-COVID since they've been this long live cattle, and their feeder cattle position, it's large for feeders as well. And so when you combine the three contracts, live cattle, feeders, and hogs, it's the most long positions that they've ever held on record. And so while the fundamentals have been bullish, everybody knows they're bullish. The old adage is a bull needs fed every day, especially when you get to frothy levels like this. I think it screams that cattle feeders really need to be managing risk at these levels. I mean, physical feeder cattle are at record high prices. Cash fats were not far off what our highs were here earlier this last year. So it just screams when the managed money crowd gets this long, there's oftentimes more downside risk than there is upside. So manage risk is the biggest takeaway for the protein space.
All right, so if folks want to talk about managing those risks, both whether it's the grains or the livestock, I mean, we definitely got news from soybeans and cattle today that they might want to start thinking about protecting themselves. What's the best way for them to get in touch with agmarket.net to do that?
You can reach me at our office here in Anthony. Our number is 712-373-3276, or you can visit agmarket.net to find any of the ag market brokers.
All right, well, Ross, we thank you so much for the insight, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks, Dustin.
That again was Ross Baldwin of agmarket.net. Let's go ahead and take a look at the closing numbers found on our screen at iowaagnet.com.
March corn was down 4 3/4 at the close, 443.5. January beans up 1/4 cent at 9.95 3/4. Soybean meal down $1.60 at 289.50 per ton. Soy oil up 23 cents at 42.67. Chicago wheat down 4 3/4 at 558.5. Kansas wheat down 4 1/2 at 562 3/4. Minneapolis spring wheat down 4 cents at 603 even. Oats up 4 1/2 cents at 362. On the Merck live cattle down 12 cents at 192.12. Feeders down 70 cents at 258.35. Lean hogs were up a dime at 84.47. Pork cutouts unchanged at 93.65. And Class 3 milk down 6 cents at 18.76.
And that's been a check of the closing numbers. You can find all our content online at iowaagnet.com. Here at the end of today's show, you can also follow us on Facebook and on our X and YouTube channels. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and sign up for the daily e-newsletter, and you could be entered into a drawing to win a Christmas present from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. You can also catch our free market analysis sent to your mobile device 3 times a day, the mornings, the middays, and the closings. You can find all that at iowaagnet.com. From the iAron studios in Des Moines, I'm Dustin Huffman. For Andy Peterson, Riley Smith, and Mark Magnuson, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.